The splintered wood of the fence post bit into her back, a familiar agony she had long stopped registering. Her arms, stretched taut above her head and bound to the post, screamed with a fire that had long since burned out any hope. Barefoot, the cold mud squelched between her toes, a constant, chilling reminder of where she stood. A threadbare shift, once white but now the color of dust and sorrow, clung to her skeletal frame. She was a wisp of a girl, perhaps 10 years of age, all sharp angles and hollows, her silence more profound than the biting wind. Her name was a whisper lost to the gusts, a question no one dared to ask. Around her, the town churned with its usual gritty life. Laughter, coarse and sharp, spilled from the saloon doors. Men spat tobacco juice into the dirt, their eyes glinting with the thrill of cards and the promise of cheap whiskey and women upstairs. She was merely part of the scenery, a grim tableau. Most paid her no mind, but a few lingered. The curious, the indignant, and the predatory, the worst kind. One such man, a gaunt figure with a perpetual sneer, gnawed on a strip of dried meat. "Gambler's marker," he grunted to a companion. "Heard he lost his last dollar, settling his debts with the only thing he's got left." There was no pity in his voice, only a flat acceptance of the world's casual cruelty. Then a figure emerged from the haze of the trail, tall and solid in the saddle. A weathered hat was pulled low, shadowing eyes that seemed to absorb the bleakness around them without flinching. His name was Silas Blackwood, a man past 40, whose life was a litany of losses. No wife, no children, only a failing ranch that demanded a piece of his soul each dawn. Silas hadn't intended to stop. He was merely passing through for a new blade for his plow, maybe a sack of flour. But as he drew level with the alley, his gaze fell upon her, the sunken cheeks, the slight tremble in her arms as they fought to hold her upright. His horse halted without a command, sensing the sudden tension in the man on its back. He watched, his jaw set like granite, listening. A booming voice shattered the air. $15 for the girl. A week of hard labor, or you can keep her. Your choice. She's scrawny, but she don't take up much room. The girl's head remained bowed. Her father, a thin, sour-smelling man with a smile that was missing more than just teeth, swaggered over and yanked the rope as if testing the sturdiness of a calf. She can scrub, mend, even cook a bit. Stronger than she looks, and quiet as a stone. Won't give you no trouble. The crowd began to disperse, the spectacle growing too grim even for their hardened sensibilities. It was then that Silas dismounted. He moved with a deliberate slowness, his eyes fixed not on the gambler, but on the child. He reached into the deep pocket of his coat and produced a small, heavy leather pouch. The sound of coins shifting inside was the only sound in the sudden quiet. The gambler's eyes narrowed. 20. Silas gave a single, curt nod. "You want it for the week, then?" The gambler sneered. "No." Silas' voice was low, rough as gravel. "Permanent." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "But I'm not purchasing a soul. I'm settling an account." The gambler shrugged, a chuckle rattling in his chest. "Call it what you want." He spat on the ground and let the rope fall into the mud. "She's your problem now." Silas didn't reply. He walked to the post, knelt in the filth, and with a small, worn knife, sliced through the coarse rope. Her arms dropped, lifeless, and she crumpled forward. He caught her, his touch firm but not unkind. For a fleeting moment she looked up, her eyes wide with a terror that expected a blow, before she quickly looked away. There were no tears, just vast, empty eyes that had forgotten to ask for mercy. They left town under a bruised evening sky. He didn't make her ride behind him. He put her on the mule, its reins tied loosely to his own saddle. She clung to the horn, her knuckles white, her face turned away from the man and the world they were leaving behind. The dust they kicked up trailed them like restless spirits. Silas Blackwood's ranch was 10 miles out, wedged between two granite bluffs like a secret the land was trying to keep. The place was a portrait of a man worn down to the bone. The barn roof sagged where a winter storm had broken its spine. A fence post by the gate listed sideways, a battle it had lost with time. The girl absorbed it all in her unnerving silence. He led her into the small, stark house.
A pot of stew simmered on the hearth, its aroma the only sign of life in the room. A thick wool blanket was neatly folded on a cot near the fire. He gestured to it. "That's yours." She remained motionless by the door. "You hungry?" A barely perceptible nod was her only answer. He ladled stew into a chipped enamel bowl and set it on the table. She sat, her hands in her lap, staring at the spoon as if it were a foreign object. "No need to hurry it," he said, his voice softer than before. She picked up the spoon with a hesitant, careful motion. As the warmth touched her tongue, a tremor ran through her, not of pain, but of a forgotten sensation, a kindness her body no longer knew how to accept. She ate only half, then whispered a thank you that sounded like it had been dragged up from a deep, dark well. He asked no questions, offered no comforting words. He simply lit a lantern against the gathering dark. "I don't hold with locks," he said, checking the fire. "You're safe in this house." She nodded, but her body remained rigid with a lifetime of caution. He went outside to tend to the animals. The night fell like a shroud, and the coyote's cry from the ridge was a lonely, mournful sound. Silas stared up at the indifferent stars and wondered what in God's name he had just done. When he returned, she was asleep on the cot, curled into a tight ball, arms wrapped around herself as if she was still bound to that post. In the dead of night, a floorboard creaked. Silas was awake in an instant, his hand closing around the stock of the rifle he kept beside his chair. The girl was standing in the shadows, her eyes gleaming like shattered glass in the moonlight. "Don't lock me in the barn," she breathed, the words barely audible. He relaxed his grip on the rifle. "I won't. I've been locked in before." It wasn't a question. A long silence stretched between them. Then she turned and retreated to her cot, curling up once more. Neither of them slept again that night. In the morning, frost etched delicate ferns onto the window panes. The sun rose, a slash of blood orange against the hills. Silas poured water into the coffee pot, his hand shaking slightly. He told himself it was just the morning chill. The girl lay on the cot, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. He didn't know his story. He didn't need to. The first thing she had asked of him wasn't for food or a blanket or even a name. It was a plea not to be caged. And for now, that was enough. She was awake before the sun had fully crested the ridge, though no one had told her to rise. It was the ingrained rhythm of a child who knew that punishment followed tardiness. The blanket had half slipped from her small frame, but she hadn't dared to pull it back up. She lay perfectly still, as if unsure the warmth was a thing she was allowed to keep. Silas was already outside, the rhythmic thud of his axe splitting firewood echoing in the crisp air. Each swing was a punctuation mark in the canyon's vast silence. The girl hesitated on the porch, a small silhouette against the growing light. When Silas finally noticed her, he simply nodded his head toward the chicken coop. "Hens need seeing to. Feeds in the barrel." She went without a word, her bare feet making fleeting prints on the frosted ground. When she returned, her hands were chapped and red, but her face was a mask of stoicism. She sat on the steps, drawing her knees to her chest, her gaze fixed on the long, empty road. They broke their silence over breakfast. Silas baked bread once a week, a dense, heavy loaf that could have been used to shore up the barn wall. But this morning, a piece he set on her plate was still warm from the hearth. He added a dollop of honey and then busied himself with his coffee, pretending not to watch her. She stared at the offering. "Am I to eat all of it?" He paused, the coffee cup halfway to his lips. "It's bread. That's what it's for." Her small hands hovered over the plate as though the food might dissolve if she touched it. She broke off a tiny piece, then hesitated. "Should I save the rest?" He leaned back, the old chair groaning under his weight. "There's a whole loaf for tomorrow." The statement hung in the air, a promise of a future she had never been allowed to imagine. She ate the bread then, slowly, deliberately, as if committing the taste to memory. In the days that followed, a routine formed, as fragile and delicate as a spider's web.
She swept the floor until the planks shone, scrubbed the cast-iron stove, and refolded her blanket a dozen times a day. She was a whirlwind of silent, frantic activity, trying to earn her keep, to justify her existence. Silas learned not to tell her to stop. The words only made her flinch, her eyes darting around as if bracing for a blow that never landed. "She doesn't know what to do with quiet," he muttered to the wind one evening. She followed him on his rounds, her short legs struggling to keep pace as he checked the fence lines. When she tripped on a loose rock, gashing her knee, she bit her lip to stifle a cry and kept walking. He stopped, tore a strip from his own shirt, and handed it to her. "Hurting's not a crime," he said gruffly. She just nodded, dabbing at the blood in silence. One evening, he found her huddled by the barn, concealed behind a rusted wheelbarrow. She wasn't sleeping, she was watching. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice low. She whispered, "Checking the door." "Checking for what?" "To see if it locks from the outside." He squatted down beside her, the cold of the ground seeping into his old bones. "It doesn't. Nothing on this ranch does." She didn't reply, but the next night she slept on the cot without waking. Whispers started in the nearest settlement. "Who's the child, Blackwood?" asked Amos Finch, a neighbor, as they watered their horses at the communal well. "She's with me," Silas answered, his tone leaving no room for further questions. Amos raised a curious eyebrow. "Folks are talking. Say it ain't proper." "Folks can talk themselves hoarse," Silas said, turning his horse to leave. "Doesn't change a thing." By the third week, she had started to hum. It was a faint, tuneless sound, something she did only when she thought he was out of earshot. It was the sound of a seed stirring in frozen ground. He pretended not to hear it. She never asked about the unmarked grave behind the house, a simple mound of stones where his wife lay. But one morning, he found a single hardy wildflower placed upon it. That night, as the fire crackled, he asked gently, "You missing someone?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, a near inaudible whisper, "I had a brother once." Spring was fighting a stubborn battle with the last of winter. The snow had receded from the peaks, and the birds had returned. She found a robin's egg on the ground one morning, a perfect, shattered piece of blue. She carried it inside and kept it on the mantelpiece, cradling it as if it were precious. "She's been broken too," Silas thought, watching her, "but she still knows how to be gentle." The first time he heard her laugh was an accident. He had managed to burn the cornbread to a black smoking ruin. "Well, that loaf gave its life for nothing," he sighed. A small snort escaped her, and she immediately clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. Silas didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth twitched into a rare smile. "About time," he said softly. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how." Their only visitor was a traveling tinker who had known Silas in a previous, less solitary life. The man's eyes immediately fell on the girl. "New hired help?" "No," Silas simply said. The tinker grunted. "Not your kin, neither." Silas turned to the girl. "Why don't you go on inside?" She scurried away without a word. When Silas looked back at the tinker, his eyes were like chips of ice. "You don't ask about her again. She is not your business." "Understood," the man said, packing his wares with a new urgency. That night, she sat at the table long after the meal was finished. Finally, she asked, "Are you going to sell me?" Silas stopped cleaning his rifle. "What?" "Men who buy girls, sometimes they sell them again when they're done." He set the rifle down with a thud. "That is not what happened here." She tilted her head. Her expression was of genuine confusion. "Then what was it?" He struggled to find the words, the truth of it. "I think," he said at last, "I saw someone drowning, and I suppose I was too. So I reached out a hand." "And?" she prompted. He met her gaze. "And you reached back." She didn't ask again. A few nights later, she handed him a scrap of paper, carefully folded. On it, in shaky, childish script, was a single word. Lena. "That's my name," she whispered. "My real one."
Silas held the paper for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right then, Lena." A smile broke across her face, so radiant it was like watching the sun rise for the very first time. The next morning, Lena set 2 plates on the table and poured 2 cups of coffee without being asked. When Silas sat down, he found a piece of warm bread waiting for him, bread she had baked. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and raised an eyebrow. "Little tough," he declared. She grinned, a full, fearless grin. "You didn't complain about mine being tough." For the first time since his wife had died, Silas Blackwood threw back his head and laughed. Outside, the wind sang through the canyons. Inside, the fire burned bright and steady, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel like he was eating alone. The wind had a mean streak the morning they arrived. Silas felt it before he saw them, a stillness in the air, the birds falling silent. The ranch dog let out a low, guttural growl, the fur on its neck standing on end. Silas straightened from the woodpile, wiping his hands on his trousers, and scanned the horizon. 3 riders, moving with an unhurried confidence that spoke of absolute certainty. Lena was inside, humming as she sorted dried beans. Silas didn't call out to her. The men reined in their horses before the gate. The first, a man in a crisp preacher's collar that seemed out of place in the dusty landscape, had eyes devoid of any charity. The second wore the tarnished badge of a lawman, his mustache trimmed with a fussy precision. The third man, Silas didn't need to be told. He had the same predatory smirk as the gambler, Jedediah Thorne. "Mornin'," Silas said, his voice flat. The preacher, Reverend Pike, stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood, I am Reverend Pike. This is Marshall Croft, and this gentleman is Mr. Jedediah Thorne." Silas offered a single, slow nod. "What's your business here?" Thorne spat into the dirt. "My brother made a deal he had no right to make. He sold you something that wasn't his to sell." "He sold me nothing," Silas countered, his gaze unwavering. "The child was tied to a post. I paid his death to see her cut loose." Marshall Croft cleared his throat officiously. "That payment is irrelevant. The girl was legally forfeit as settlement for a gambling debt. There is official paperwork. She's not a horse or a sack of grain. She's a child," Silas said, his voice dangerously low. "We are not here to debate morality, Mr. Blackwood. You are harboring stolen property. The law requires you to return the child to her legal guardian." A cold fire kindled in Silas's chest. "She's safer here than she ever was with him. She has a bed, warm meals. She isn't afraid." "That doesn't make it legal," the marshal insisted. Just then Lena appeared in the doorway, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She looked impossibly small, yet she stood as if rooted to the spot. Thorne's eyes fixed on her, his lips curling into a possessive smile that made Silas's blood run cold. "Lena," the preacher said, his voice like honey laced with poison, "come along, child. We've come to take you home." She didn't move. "Girl," Thorne growled, "you belong to us. You were promised." Silas moved to stand between them and the porch. "She's not going anywhere." The marshal's hand drifted towards his pistol. "Are you obstructing an officer of the law, Blackwood?" Silas glanced back at Lena. Her eyes were not filled with fear, but with a hard, defiant light. "You have 7 days, Silas stated, his voice ringing with finality. "Come back with a judge's order, or don't come back at all." Reverend Pike's face tightened. "The Lord does not look kindly on a stubborn heart." The 3 men mounted their horses and rode away, swallowed by the dust from which they had appeared. The silence they left behind was heavy and suffocating. "They'll be back," Lena said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Then we have 7 days," she replied, turning and walking back into the house as if adding it to her list of chores. That night, Silas sat by the fire, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He thought of his wife, of her quiet strength. Lena was nothing like her. She was a fighter, forged in fires he could only imagine. She sat across from him, mouthing the words in an old hymnal. After a long while, she whispered, "If they take me, what will you do?"
He kept his eyes on the flames. Depends on how loud you fight back. The week bled away too quickly. On the fourth day, Silas showed Lena how to handle the old rifle. Not to shoot anyone, he explained, but so you know the heft of your own defense. She held it with a solemn reverence. On the sixth day, she asked to sleep outside. So I'll remember how if I have to run again. He laid a blanket out for her under the vast, star-dusted sky. They didn't need to speak. The seventh morning dawned pale and breathless. A wagon rattled up the road shortly after sunrise. It wasn't the law. A woman climbed down, her face a road map of hardship, her eyes deep set with the grief that seemed ancient. She leaned heavily on a cane. When she saw Lena, the cane dropped from her hand. "Mama," Lena breathed, the word a fragile thing. The woman, no older than 30 but looking twice that, collapsed to her knees, pulling Lena into an embrace so fierce the girl gasped for air. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed. "I told them I was coming back for you." "They sold me," Lena said, her voice numb. "I know." Her mother, Mara, choked out. "They lied. They told me you were gone." Silas stepped back, feeling like an intruder on a sacred moment. But Lena turned to him, her eyes pleading. "This is my mama." He nodded. "I figured as much." Mara struggled to her feet. "I have a small place near Cotton Bend. It's not much, but it's ours. I came to take her home." Silas looked at the woman's tattered dress and bruised arms. She was a ghost trying to reclaim her life. Lena looked from her mother to Silas, waiting. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Lena took her mother's hand, then turned back to Silas. "Will you come with us, just for a bit, to help us get settled safe?" His throat felt thick. "That's your home." She stepped closer, her small, calloused hand closing around his. "It can be yours too," she said. The wagon rolled out before noon. 3 broken souls, a single thread of hope, and the preacher's threats scattered like chaff in the wind. The sound of a girl calling a man family, however, would echo across those plains for a long, long time. The journey to Cotton Bend was slow, measured. Trust, Silas knew, was a shy creature, easily startled. Mara slept from sheer exhaustion in the back of the wagon, with Lena sitting watchfully beside her. Silas walked, his hand resting on the mule's harness. He hadn't planned on this, but when Lena had asked, he found he was incapable of saying no. The shack was little more than a lean-to propped against a rock face, its walls a patchwork of scavenged tin and weathered planks. Yet inside, the floor was swept clean, and a child's drawing was tacked to the wall. A woman, a girl, and a red house, the color faded like a distant memory. "She kept it," Lena whispered in awe. That night, as Mara slept, a new thread appeared on the horizon, the telltale orange glow of a wildfire on the western ridge. By morning, the wind had shifted, driving the fire toward them. "We have to run," Silas said. But Lena was staring at a small shed beside the shack. "Mama's things. My books." "They're not worth your life," he insisted. But he saw the look on Mara's face, the fresh wave of loss. "Get the mule. I'll get what I can." He kicked open the shed door, grabbing an old trunk and a bundle of linens, just as the first embers began to rain down around them. They fled as the ridge behind them became a rearing beast of orange and black, consuming everything in its path. Mara cried silently. Lena did not. "It took everything," she said, her voice flat. "Not everything," Silas replied, looking at her and her mother. They camped by a creek that night. "I thought coming here would fix things," Lena murmured, her back against a rock that was still warm from the day's sun. "It did," he said. "How? It's all gone." "Fire burns what's already dead," Silas said.
his voice quiet but sure. "It can't touch what's still alive." When they returned the next day, the shack was a ruin of blackened timbers. But near a charred stump, a book lay in the ash, scorched but intact. Lena picked it up. Inside, her drawing was untouched by the flames. She clutched it to her chest, a small, weary smile gracing her lips. "I guess the fire didn't get everything." "No," he agreed. "Not even close." As they prepared to leave, Mara put a hand on his arm. "You didn't have to do any of this." "No," he said, "but I'm glad I did."
He put Lena's book in his saddlebag. "Let's go home," he said, and for the first time, the word felt right. Home was a field of black ash. The fences were gone, the barn a skeleton of charred beams. This was no wildfire. This was hatred, deliberate and cruel. Scrawled across the door of the house in charcoal was a single word: thief. Mara gasped, but Lena walked forward and traced the letters with her fingers. "They just want us to be afraid," she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. The girl who had pleaded not to be locked in a barn was gone. In her place stood someone forged in fire and grief. "We're not running anymore." "No," Silas agreed. "We're not." They began to rebuild. At dawn, a knock came at the door. It was Amos Finch. "Word gets around," he said, not looking at the destruction but at Silas. "Some say you took what wasn't yours. Others say you did what was right. I know which side I'm on." Behind him were other neighbors, carrying planks, nails, and a pot of stew. They didn't ask questions, they just started to work. Jedediah Thorne rode in at dusk, alone this time. "Quite the party," he sneered. "You think a new fence changes anything? She's still mine by law." "She's not property," Silas said, stepping forward. "You gonna marry the widow to make it legal?" Thorne mocked. "You really want a broken woman and a feral brat for your family?" "We're not running anymore." Before Silas could move, Lena stepped off the porch. She walked right up to Thorne and slapped him across the face. The crack echoed in the sudden silence. "You will not speak of my mother," she said, her voice quiet but as sharp as broken glass. "And I do not belong to you." Thorne's hand twitched toward his gun, but he saw the faces watching him, hard, silent men holding hammers and axes. He was outnumbered. He mounted his horse, his face a mask of fury. "You'll regret this." "No," Silas said, standing beside Lena. "I won't." When he was gone, Lena turned to Silas, her small body trembling with adrenaline. "I was scared," she admitted. "I know." "But I didn't run." "No," he said, a fierce pride welling in his chest. "You didn't." That night, they ate stew around the newly built fence posts. As Mara sang a soft lullaby, Lena laid her head on her mother's shoulder and closed her eyes. Silas watched the three of them, a strange, patched-together family bound not by blood but by fire and resilience. Later, Lena looked up at him in the firelight. "Do you think I'm still broken?" He didn't answer immediately. He went inside and returned with his late wife's small, sharp carving knife, its handle worn smooth with use. He placed it in Lena's hand. "It's not about being broken," he said softly. "It's about what you carve from the pieces." She held the knife, its blade gleaming in the dark, and then she smiled. Not because she was fixed, but because she was finally free. In the years to come, people in that valley would forget the story of the girl tied to a post. They would know Lena by the bread she baked, the fences she mended, and the fierce, unwavering strength in her eyes. And when they saw her ride her own wagon into town, her own name proudly painted on the side, no one called her a stray. They called her a Blackwood. Because some names are not given, but earned, and fire only destroys what is meant to burn, making way for what is meant
to grow.